Sorry.
Now, intersectionality is a strand of Black feminism which was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 90s. Her work showed how gender and race are interdependent and structure one another. Therefore, a Black woman is not Black on the one hand and woman on the other, but rather a combination of the both. I use intersectionality to explore my experience, which was underpinned by both race and gender. I combine this theoretical framework with psychodynamics theory because it offers a distinctive way of thinking about the human mind and how it responds to psychological distress, placing emphasis on internal and psychic conflict and how the individual attempts to manage this conflict. These theories helped me to understand the source of my poetry, which I started to write during my PhD. Poetry as a creative construct acted as a third space of inexpressible, acted as a communication, a tool to give voice to feelings and ideas that are almost inexpressible, that cause pain, but which can be subtly articulated in a way which enables us to cope. The process of writing poems gave me the opportunity to experience what Britain 89 calls as a triangular space, a space to reflect on myself while being myself, while expressing the anxiety and imagery to others. So this poem is called My Burden. I'm not my hair, I'm not my skin. I'm a professional woman doing my thing. A civil servant working within the towering walls they keep me in. The racial stereotype, a burden I must bear. I wish I could be free and just be me. Not Black or proud or angry and loud, nor a coconut seen as a token of equality. Maintaining my dignity, self-respect and apathy, so you don't feel guilty for treating me differently. One day you'll stop insulting me, excluding me, harassing me. Maybe you'll notice me, see me and treat me fairly in this carceral space known as my workplace. The poem acts as a symbol of the pain of being reduced to my physical characteristics that leads to less favorable treatment and exclusion. The psychological pressure this causes is suppressed and controlled through emotional labor. Emotional labor was defined by Hochschild in the early 80s. In simple terms, it's about the management of one's feelings to create positive emotional feelings in others while at work. So that in mind, while I experienced racial oppression and isolation because of the intersectionality of gender and race, there was no discourse to express myself because prison occupation literature is dominated by white men's standpoint, or what I refer to as the axiomatic prison employee experience. Therefore, writing poetry was a means to contain the pain I experienced and channel it into my poems to express the source of my anxiety through my imagination.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking we let the presenters present and then open up for discussion and engagement afterwards. Do we have
Adetoun.
Thank you. Grant, that's you.
I'm happy to stay here if that's easier. Or should I try and make my
I think maybe the
Up to you, honestly. So yeah, our little owl guy here picks up everyone. So yes, if you stand, I think it's just as good as standing in the front here. So you're good. You're brilliant.
Okay. Really quickly, just want to say that Marcia, there's so much resonance there. So that was a great setup. Mindful of times, I'm just going to start. So when reflecting that slavery was once considered to be a normal part of society, that one human should be uprooted from the familiarity and safety of their home to the literal possession and mercy of another, subjected to the worst violence and brutalities based on man-made hierarchy of the colour of a person's skin. I felt overwhelmed with emotion that I describe as a great sadness. This great sadness sits in the pit of my stomach, waiting to rear its head. It manifests as a stabbing sensation in my heart. It heats my whole body, causes my mind to fog, my eyes to swell, and words to become jumbled. At times it renders me into complete silence and submission, whilst other times it provokes anger, followed by a fear that my reaction has now confirmed their racial stereotypes. It's not a feeling that's consistent, but it is a feeling that will always remain. A feeling that appears when reading another headline of a race-related atrocity, or experiencing yet another microaggression. Or whilst trying to remain composed and unafraid of the giant swastika spray painted on my front door. I feel that great sadness when peers ask for more of my experiences. I feel it when they remain a silent ally. I feel it when I think of my daughter and wonder what's said about her when I'm not allowed to protect her. I feel it when the eyes of the security guard burn into the back of my head. I feel it when I'm sat in my car outside my home and the policeman asks, "What are you doing here?" I feel it when questioned about the amount of pain medication I require. I feel it when I'm jogging. I feel it when I'm out walking. I feel it when I'm the only person of colour in my class. I feel it when I'm the only black woman in the meeting. I feel it when we are the only black family in the neighbourhood. I feel it when I am the only one. I feel it all of the time and none of the time, as it's so deeply interwoven throughout and within my world that I accept it as an integral part of my being. It's both a defence mechanism and a security system. When I was a baby, 3 months old, my brother and I were placed into foster care. This began as a private arrangement between 2 mothers and lasted almost 10 years, until events concerning my health and the management of my sickle cell anemia condition led my white mum obtaining primary care of my brother and I through the court. I now wonder if my birth mother was a victim of racial discrimination. We live in a society where it's claimed that all will be done to ensure the child remains with their biological family. But this didn't happen in our case. Perhaps the power of my mum's white skin meant she had already won the court battle before she had even begun the process. During my late teens, my world began to look a little less white. I started college and began mixing with people from all different backgrounds. I once felt amazed that I'd come out unscathed, that I could confidently declare and embrace my blackness despite the odds. I felt like a conqueror, though not fully conscious that I was even in a battle. But I was. The battle result of internalized racism, something that I had naively thought never applied to me, because I didn't fully understand the definition of thought that I must hate myself, my black skin, black people, for this to relate. However, I can provide many examples that highlight my own internalized racism. I unwittingly developed a notion that white was better. I always felt like the other duckling growing up, and would often compare myself to my white girlfriend, with her delicate features and long flowing locks. I was around 14 years old when I first relaxed my hair. I walked into school the next day with mouth gas, and I bathed in her compliments to my naturally straight hair and the magical disappearance of my afro. Other examples of my internalized racism include feeding into the belief that I was pretty for a black girl and being pleased when told I spoke well, whilst knowing what was really meant by these derogatory, patronizing, and racist statements. Accepting the many iterations of my name for these of others, and not challenging microaggressions. Being complicit in the racist rhetoric spouted off by my white friends and family, because I was different from the rest of them. I was told I was the exception, and I believed I was. I became a master of making things fit. I wasn't ready to challenge, I did not have the right to question, but be grateful for what I had. And as dramatic as it may sound, I just wanted to survive.
Thank you so much. Okay, I met Kate earlier, didn't I? Briefly, there you are, thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you. My name is Kate Ashley, and this is my autoethnography, Taking Myself Seriously, an exploration of illness beliefs, empathy, and the capacity for change. So it's my first time presenting at an academic conference. Thank you. So I'm pretty nervous, but back earlier this year, when Past Kate was signing up to take part, She thought it was a great idea. She thought I'd get the chance to practice my presentation skills, share my research, get to know other people interested in autoethnography. She's like, it's going to be wonderful. But past Kate did not have to do the actual presenting. Present day Kate does, and she's terrified. So thanks a lot, past Kate. I also know that future Kate is going to be really impressed with myself. And viewing these different parts of myself was quite key to my methodology, the way I did my research. As I say, I was talking about illness beliefs, and viewing the different selves of myself, different parts of myself, gave me the kind of space and compassion to explore this in a new way. So I wanted to introduce you to a few more selves that have taken part in this research, starting with student Kate. So I've just finished a master's. So for the past 3 years, she has been working very hard, writing essays, doing her practice hours, and putting together the proposal for this research. And I first heard about autoethnography. I was really struck by how vivid and evocative it was. It's really attractive. There was also a part of me that thought, is it really a serious kind of way of doing research? Is it rigorous enough? There was a lot of those sort of preconceptions about it. And I thought, actually, having those preconceptions and choosing to do it anyway feels really open and exciting to me. I don't know what's going to happen if I do this anyway, if I take part in something that I feel a little bit like, oh, about. So I decided to do autoethnography. But before I was a counsellor and before I was a student, I was a journalist, and I spent a lot of time interviewing people. I knew how to put people at ease, ask the right questions, and get the information to put together a really compelling story. And I thought, oh, it's such a shame that I can't use all that experience, those skills in my research. Obviously, autoethnography, I'm dealing with a data set of one, it's just me. So I was going back and forth, and then I realized that there could be a way to combine both of those things. So I decided to interview myself, and I used those different parts of myself to sit down and do an interview. And I took it very seriously, the same way that I would do with any participant. I tried to put myself at ease, got myself a drink of water, had the list of questions that they'd had a chance to see before the interview. And I had my dictaphone and my pen, and I sat down and had that interview with myself. And the transcript from that data became the source of what I used in my autoethnography. And you might be thinking, why illness beliefs? And a lot of that came from client Kate, who has been crying on therapist sofas for approximately the last 8 years, on and off. And this was something that was coming up a lot when I was doing my research, was thinking about what beliefs I had around illness, how they were impacting me, what they meant. So I was thinking a lot about it, and that's what I decided to make the focus of that interview and that research. And this research is in the process of making me a better therapist, my current self. And I think doing the process of autoethnography has been really transformative, and it has made me a better therapist. Which brings us all the way back to today. Presenter Kate. Really trying to calm down, she's not really, but here we are. So I'll just take this back. And all these different selves work together to look at my illness beliefs, to examine the cultural context that I'd grown up in, where I lived, being raised Christian, my family's norms around illness beliefs. And another key part of my research was focused on the possibility of transformation or change. And as I say, when I first started doing autoethnography, I was a bit skeptical about how that would work, whether that would be useful. And I had the same thing with this idea of whether I would be able to change my illness beliefs. It felt quite unlikely that that would be the case. Yeah. But being able to start this research thinking, I'm probably not going to change, but let's see what happens, was in itself transformational. And I remember getting to the end of my project and writing up the research and this question, is change possible, that I'd started out not knowing if that was true. By the time I was writing it up, I could already see that I had begun to change and I was changing. So I think in the same way that I can choose to do autoethnography, even though there's a part of me, a little critical voice that says, this is a bit silly, I can choose to act differently around my illness whenever I'm ill. So I can choose to take myself more seriously. I can go to the doctor. I can take time off work. I can be kinder to myself. All whilst that voice is still going on. That's just one part of me, just like all these other parts that have come together to put this research together. So being able to choose to act differently, having the space to make those choices, is me changing, even when some of those beliefs might take a lot longer to shift. So autoethnography, I think, was really successful for me. I found it really transformational, personally and in my practice. So yeah, it's been very therapeutic. And thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions.
Is there a Beverley, Thomas?
Start. Right, so my research is about the Black experience. In other words, what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be Black British? Or as Andrea Levy says, the bastard child of empire. Autoethnography, because it allows us as Black people to be seen through our own words. And creative, rather than talk about my abstract, I'm going to read a creative piece. And I want to tell you a little bit about the creative piece before I start. This creative writing actually was written by my friend Mike Gibbers over there. And it was called Chew. And it followed me around for days. And I thought, I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to call it X. And I'm going to base it in slavery, because that was the time when we had no identity, except the identity given to us by other people. So thus, this story is a radical reimagining of what it means to take back control.
Disappeared. Forgotten.
My ending began when Marcia banished X to the old barn. Off you go, boy, he snarled, and he bundled my beloved brother into that dark, dusty place that stank of animals. My brother X, you see, was a fighting rage of nerves, ticks, and cousins. He couldn't ever keep still. Every day he'd tell Marcia and overseer to go fuck themselves, and end up beaten senseless, gasping for air, his breath fast and hard. Exercising anger and fear, frightening, yet it comforted me. Calm would descend by me cradling him to sleep like a mum should. I was just a girl. I miss Mama and that cloak of sweat and earth she wore from working in the field. That smell was always around her. It always made me feel safe. After she passed, the hut just reeked of the overseer, his filthy sweat stinking out my bed at night, the overseer's vile breath blowing on my tight, tiny afro and down the back of my neck. That's when X started to chew on his fingers, rocking back and forwards, glaring at the overseer with a killer's stare. When ordered to stop, he chewed down even harder. That's when he got the taste. X began to eat his own flesh. First, he'd bite his nails right down till his fingertips was red and sore. With a sliver of fingernail in his teeth, he'd pull it down slowly so a brown strip of skin would tear off. As his fingers healed, he'd nibble at that dry skin. His small bites soon became bigger and bloodier. Soon, all his digits were bloody stubs. He'd bite and suck. That was when Marcia, egged on by overseer, decided he'd had enough and exiled my brother. You're on your own, boy, survive or die. And survive is all we'd done in those days following the white skins, the dead Africans, and the dead crops. After X was thrown out of the hut, I'd stand in the field and imagine I was floating up and away from the plantation, my bare feet peeking out from under my ragged skirt, dancing in the air, wishing I could fly away. Every day I'd sneak out to the barn to check on my brother, and one Sunday I caught him with a knife. He placed it over his index finger and shuddered with pleasure as the blade pushed through the skin and bone. His finger fell onto the gritty floor with a dull thud. Screaming, I rushed to his aid. Hissing, he declared, "I'm hungry." He gathered up the bloody digit and gnawed on it like a starving coyote, bones and all, blood running like gravy through his teeth, his butchered mitt dripping on the filthy floor. I ran to the big house to get Marcia, but he wasn't there. Just his papers on the chair, notes to try to sell X again at a reduced price. Bastard, I muttered to myself. I told X that he needed to stop, as Marcia was going to sell him for sure this time, but he didn't listen. Told me he was determined to eat himself whole, to prove Marcia and this overseer wrong, to prove that they, the whites, could never own us. Because I loved him, I indulged him. When he had digested all 10 fingers, I got him started on his arm. I cut great chunks off, pushed the meat in his mouth, sterilized the wound and bound him up. Slowly, he was escaping this life. Before long, I'd cut off both arms and legs and fed them to him, along with his legs and his balls. My devotion made me commit these atrocities. It was his one true desire, his only ambition, his appetite. My saddest day was when I had to spoon out his dark eyes from their sockets and feed them to him. He didn't even chew, just swallowed them whole. Now he was a blind, grotesque tree stump of a boy, all scarlet and scabbed with bloody tears rolling down his cheeks. I couldn't see his soul no more, and he no longer could see mine. I remember the first time I saw his face. He was lying in the sugar field covered in blood and guts. Marcia had not believed Mama when she told him that she would soon give birth. He made her work in the hot baking sun, and when she slowed down, the overseer would crack his whip. I still think about that day and the face of my baby brother, and how his eyes twinkled in the midday sun amongst all those cane stalks. Too much. The feeding must end. I abandoned him to pray to a God that could neither hear nor see the plight of the unforsaken enslaved ones on this miserable island they called Jamaica. But prayer was all I had left. Time passed, the plantation now dry and dead. The skies changed from orange to purple. Noises from nature stopped. I finally returned to the barn and put what was left of X into the old tin trough that filled with his blood, then left again. The next time I returned, it's going to go over by 1 minute. The next time I returned, I looked for sight of his corpse, but found something else. Inside, I could hear my brother's familiar breathing, hard and fast, then hovering in the darkness of the barn, an impossible thing. Told you? An impossible thing. I saw a mouth, just a mouth in mid-air, a strange, sad mouth with a heavy tongue and yellowing teeth. It croaked in a voice parched by neglect. Empty, empty. I sobbed as that terrifying orifice opened wide, like a bear trap and folded back. In one almighty chunk, the mouth swallowed itself whole and vanished. He'd done it. My brother had finally eaten himself, every piece of him.
not a shred of humanity left, just this great hole of darkness and hurt lingering in the barn, an abyss that wanted me to jump in and lose myself. Quiet, all air had gone. I walked out of the barn into the daylight, and the dust stuck to the tears in my eyes. All I wanted to do was to disappear, but I had never had the dedication my beloved brother had. All I could do was wait. And please ask me what the difference is and why I kept certain things in to what mine had.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you so much. The next one is Gemma.
Yes.
Thank you. Parkinson.
Hello, good morning. It's nice to be here. Beverley, I'm still with your poem at the moment, so okay. So my autoethnography is about cisgendered stereotypes and perceptions in the therapy room. So I'm currently a trainee therapist at UE. And this came about really because I noticed that as a trainee therapist, when I was about to see my first male client, I found myself feeling a lot more trepidation than I had when I was first seeing a female client. And I was thinking to myself, well, what is this about? I need to get to the bottom of this if I'm going to be a fair and equitable therapist. As we can see, gender stereotypes are pretty deeply embedded in society. And this starts from, how do I move on to the next one? Oh, it's just looking at, where's my mouse? Lost it. Okay. There it is. Thank you. Okay. And as we know, this tends to start from birth. When I'm looking for a present for my 4-year-old niece or for my friend's son who's 6, I'm really struck by how stark the differences are. Probably won't come as a surprise to see that the boys' toys, so-called, are mechanical, are scientific, and the girls' toys are really focused on nurturing and relationships. So despite all the kind of strides we've supposedly made in gender equality, there seems to remain a very strong message right from birth, which is obviously really limiting. There's no prizes here for guessing who said what. It is exactly what you're thinking. So already at these very young ages, children are being shaped and developed and told how they should be based on the sex they were born with, which obviously is incredibly limiting. So for me, it really started, I guess, with a yoga class. My friend Laura and I were going to a yoga class to welcome in spring. Oddly enough, it had been snowing, but anyway, we went there. And we were sat in the car waiting for the class to begin. And a man walked by. And my friend turned to me and said, oh, I wonder if he's going to the yoga class. And I snorted. I said, no, I don't think so. He was. And I thought to myself, what gender stereotypes am I still carrying with me, despite years of supposedly looking at this, of thinking about equality? And in the yoga class, we chanted this chant, the Sa, Ta, Na, Ma chant, which is infinity, life, death, and rebirth. And this basically became a little bit of a guideline for me actually writing this autoethnography. So I started with the Ta part, the life part. And I was looking back at myself, my childhood, the messages I've been given. And I grew up in a family where both parents went out to work to try and make ends meet. But my mum was also seemingly responsible for all of the domestic tasks and pretty much most of bringing up my sister and I don't think it was that my dad was sexist. I think it was just that he was pretty unaware of what was going on around him. He often seemed to be a little bit in his own world, in his own fantasy world. Well, when my mum left the marriage, he was absolutely bereft and didn't know what to do with himself. And thinking back to this, I think this left me with perhaps a couple of main impressions. First of all, I wonder if I was thinking that women tend to be more proactive because it was my mum that had left the marriage and changed her life, and that men tend to be more passive based on, you know, the father I'd grown up with. I also felt that I had to rescue my dad, and that set me up for continuous failure because I never could. So when I saw my first male client, it was quite interesting because he came to me seemingly expecting some kind of magic solution. When I asked him what he wanted from counselling, he couldn't articulate that. And I felt like he took responsibility for his life, handed it to me, and I took it instead of giving it back. And it left me feeling rather like the Wizard of Oz at the point where Dorothy discovers who he really is. And I'm going to try and play this clip now. Sorry, I can't play the clip. Let me go back. How do I go back, Jessie? Is it just that one? And then click on this bit. Yeah. Yeah, just click and click yes. I've got the Wi-Fi. That's okay. We'll see if it. I'll move on.
Are you seeing?
Ah, yeah, it's not coming up. Okay. That's right. That's okay. Don't worry, we can get back to the PowerPoint. That's fine. I'm going to have it shared. So it's basically the bit in the Wizard of Oz where the curtain is pulled back and the Wizard of Oz is standing there trying to pretend to be the big, you know, powerful Oz, and Dorothy discovers he's just a person. And I guess this sort of, you know, so I was sat there expecting to you know, give magic solutions. And this led me to think about the sa part of the chant, the infinity. And I was thinking about the drama triangle. Don't worry, we can get back to the chant, that's fine. And I was thinking about the drama triangle and how, you know, in terms of infinity, thank you, I seem to go right back to my default role as the rescuer. And this left my client very little room to go other than victim and persecutor. And certainly that persecutor element seemed to be there in the fact that he shut down any suggestions that I was bringing, possibly because he felt like he wasn't having control, I don't know. So I do wonder now if I'd been able to step back from this and not go to my default roles, whether that would have opened up more space for him to develop more autonomy. So ultimately I decided that rather than trying to be the Wizard of Oz, I needed to start channeling my inner Glinda. Particularly when she says to Dorothy, you don't need to be helped any longer. You've always had the power. You just had to learn it for yourself. So really trying to empower my clients and find room for them to be autonomous. So thinking about the na part, the death part of this chant, I was really thinking about what do I need to let go of and what do I need to make room for? What do I need to embrace? And, you know, as we all know, empathy can be a really powerful tool. And it led me to thinking two things. First of all, have I been over-identifying with my female clients? And have I been thinking it's easier to feel empathy for women purely because we might have had shared experiences, which is, in a sense, now I've come to the end of the autoethnography, a bit of a nonsense because in a way everyone is very different. And for my male clients, given the messages that society is still giving out about being strong, in inverted commas, you know, not talking about your emotions, I was actually thinking about how brave it was for them to come to therapy in the first place. So ultimately, thinking about next steps and the the rebirth part of the chant, I think there's two key things that need to keep being reborn. The first is me as a therapist. I almost feel like I need to continuously rebirth myself in terms of always looking at my stereotypes, my assumptions, what I'm bringing into the room and reflecting on that. And the second thing, obviously, is society. Possibly things are starting to change slightly. There's this advert with the, you know, boys do cry in the corner. Perhaps it's not changing as quickly as we like. But basically for me, I'm hoping that as a therapist, when I'm working with my clients, I can be a tiny change in society by being continuously aware of gender stereotypes and giving people that space to move forward. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Vivienne. I'm a second year master's student studying counselling and psychotherapy at UE. I identify as a cis female lesbian and a mixed heritage Chinese, Malaysian and white Irish. From the age of 11 to 18, I attended an all-girls boarding school in the UK. I look at the impact my boarding school experience had on the development of my identity. In particular, the Asian and queer parts. I argue that the intersectional experience of a boarder who is queer questioning or identifying and from a mixed heritage background has been given little consideration. And I use the narrative exploration of myself to emphasize the importance therapists need to take in being open and curious and aware of what the client's intersectional experience could be. So research around boarding schools and the impact these institutions have on the students' identity development is limited. Research in the UK is dominated by the work of psychotherapist Duffel and psychoanalyst Sheffield. Duffel gives a strong focus to the cis male heteronormative experience, and Sheffield offers a more balanced view of the cis male and cis female experience. Both texts take a brief look at homosexuality, but don't take into account intersectionality, with very little attention given to the boarder's experience of living in an institutional setting that follows a culture different from the student's home setting. So I decided to structure the main memories I wanted to depict as a kind of day in the life of me in boarding at age 11. A narrative weaves throughout that captures moments at different points of my day. Initially, I felt overwhelmed as to how I would capture and structure so many memories that came flooding back to me. And then I had this eureka moment when I thought about the constant sound of the boarding school bell. Here's a picture from the joining instructions I'd kept. And as you can see, there was a bell telling you what to do all day. As I navigate the twists and turns the day presents, the sound of the boarding school bell forms a frame for each scene, immersing the reader in a strict rule-bound setting. And it's funny to think that a sound that I hated so much became helpful for my narrative structure. So to give an idea, here's the first narrative entry I made. The bell for tea time sounds. I'm curled up tight, tucked in between a wall and an old hospital bed, and I'm panicking. I'm alone, hiding in the dorm room I share with 4 other girls. They enter the dorm. I know they have no idea I'm here. My dorm mates, supposed friends, stop talking to me again. I'm a victim of another fallout for no reason again. My chest tightens, heart sinks. I need to reveal myself and go down to tea. I can't believe she cried. She's so weird. She's always been weird, said one of them to another. They're talking about me. I steel myself, climb out from behind the bed, and with a mask of calm composure, walk past them, my heart pumping all the way. They're staring at me. I can sense their shock and irritation. They will hate that I did that. Great. Another mark against my name. I think to myself, it's a solemn walk along the long corridors towards the dining room. I start by looking at the pressure to fit in and align this to Erikson's theory of the identity struggle the adolescent goes through in trying to fit into the societal setting, but also to find a way to differentiate between self and others. This next bit of narrative shows some exploration I did with regards to how my Asian and white identities were tugged in different directions. I'm now standing outside the dining room in my designated area along with the rest of my year group, waiting to be allowed to enter. Hierarchy and rules are important here. Don't cross the line into another year group's area. The group of 4 is standing as far away from me as possible. The sadness and loneliness from this rejection feels almost unbearable. How am I going to make it through the rest of the day in this place? I hate it here. The boarders from Hong Kong form their own separate groupings. Maybe I could try and be friendlier with them. No, forget it. I'm in no group. What can I do to fit into the right group? Maybe I'm not wearing the right clothes. Standing alone, I pick at the zipper on the Adidas fleece I begged my mum to buy for me. I thought this fleece would help me blend in, but it doesn't seem to be working. She doesn't like the wave of sports branding everyone wants to wear. I suspect she doesn't want me to become like one of the corrupted Western girls with their short skirts and loud mouths. I argue that my mother was trying to align herself, and as a result, myself, to the model minority myth, the idea of being a good, quiet, and assimilated Asian. Kathy Park Hong's writing in Minor Feelings on the Asian American experience resonated with me. When I hear the phrase, Asians are next in line to be white, I replace the words white with disappear. Asians are next in line to disappear. I argue that the Hong Kong boarders were second-class citizens. They were dismissed, invisible. I didn't want to be demoted, so I rejected my Asian heritage in order to be visible to the white boarders. I look at the other ways my identity was impacted, such as wanting to be accepted by the Asian boarders, but feeling rejected at the same time. Beep. The bell sounds for bedtime. I change along with the other girls into my pajamas. We take turns brushing our teeth in the small bathroom nearby. Placing my clothes carefully on the chair beside my bed. This chair, my bed, my dresser, the only things I can call mine in this place. Everything is shared. Everything belongs to this institution. One of the girls tells us how her brother in a boarding school somewhere else can hear boys masturbating at night in their beds. We all squeal at the perversity of it. No one says it, but we know there's an unwritten rule that we should, under no circumstances, do that. The lack of privacy silenced same-sex attraction within me. Being in the institutional environment, constantly surrounded by peers who were following heteronormative rules, policed my thoughts to the point that I felt it was wrong to have same-sex sexual fantasies. Dwight Turner explains that the need to fit into society means we get rid of the unacceptable parts of ourselves. I argue that the pressures of the boarding school environment led me to kill off or reject my Asian heritage and queer identity. Despite having greater acceptance of my intersectional parts now, I'm aware that I'm still in the process of unearthing elements of those parts of my identity that remain hidden. To connect with these parts, lived experience in the therapist I work with has been something I look for. The most recent therapists I've chosen to be have been queer. I believe this decision has come from the worry that a heteronormative therapist could, without realizing, gloss over the queer parts of myself, both revealed and hidden. Searching for lived experience in the therapist sitting opposite me is my attempt at physically bringing intersectionality into the therapy room. But I haven't been able to combine mixed heritage lived experience with queer identity. All of the therapists I've worked with have been white identifying. This has meant accepting that significant parts of my Asian heritage might still remain outside the therapy room. Even my own attempt at bringing my intersectionality into the therapy space via lived experience has failed. My drive for lived experience shows the need for the therapist, whatever their background, to be continually open, curious, and aware of what the client's intersectional experience might be.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you. When I first saw the program, that's how I knew I was going to be chair. I was thinking it's a bit strange that the white 47-year-old male, cisgender, heterosexual. Norwegian is going to cheer this, but maybe there's some meaning behind it because it's been really troubling me. It made me uncomfortable. I think that's what I need. I got goosebumps when moving earlier today. I've got goosebumps several times in this section. Thank you. I'm not going to say much, I hope, because I'm striving to seem like a reasonable person and keeping track of time. So I just want to invite everyone of you to comment, reflect, ask questions. You had a question for yourself, didn't you? Yeah, so we got that ready. It's going to be silent. We have a chat.
We do have a chat. I have one from Victoria just passing on some, I think it's a research paper. I'm not sure. I was going to send it. I'm not sure. I'm so bad with names. So either way, Gemma, I'm emailing you the link because Victoria First-Smith just asked to pass it on. Up to you what you do with it, but either way, I'll just forward that on to you. But continue on. Thesis. You're welcome. Cool.
I just wanted to say thank you to all the presenters. It was really powerful and really moving. And I was thinking about that idea about disappearance and appearance, and actually it felt really important to have those voices here. We heard them. I think that felt really important. So I just want to say thank you to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Could you repeat the question?
All right. Right. In the story, I kept in, well, certain parts of my friend's original writing. And one particular part was the empty. Because part of his story, I hope you can remember your own story. He wrote the words, when he'd eaten himself, he wrote the word empty. But I kept in empty. And because I want to tell you what that meant to me, but why did you put in empty?
That's a good question. I read that. But I have to say, it really was emotional for me to hear that story. There was a lot of similarities, but it was like weird multiverse where when my story had become something completely different and it had a whole new power. And it was really affecting. I think the work was beautiful. So it's the first I've heard of it. You know, so, if I think about that story for me when I wrote it, and it had all those elements: someone going in a barn, someone eating themselves, just a mouth left in space at the end. I think when I wrote it, I think I was thinking about suicide, and I was thinking about possibly taking my own life. The story wasn't written from a sister. I don't have a sister. Written by a female point of view, describing this person. It was quite a dark space. I stood by my finger.
This afternoon.
Horrible things like that, and I just sort of developed that story. And I think the empty for me was that.
Okay, 2 o'clock.
Not wanting to. So,
okay.
Whereas yours is far more defined.
Yeah.
Emptiness.
Okay then.
Mine's very much.
I'll see you then. Cheers.
In a way, it was a kind of defiance.
Yeah. Because my empty was like, I'm now empty of all the racial abuse, all the degradation, all the transgenerational memories that would have followed me is now done. I am just empty of that. That's what it meant.
Yeah.
Also, what also came out for me in your empty was I'm also rid of the body that was the cause for me landing up in this position in the first place. That was the only way of getting rid of this position, was to
rid myself from this body.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
We have one hand up online. Sam, do you want to unmute yourself and we'll try and see how good the speakers are.
Yeah. Okay. I was starting to write it in the chat because it's more of a reflection, and I think I wanted to what I've just what you've shared with me again resonates, and likewise I had goosebumps, and I suppose it links to the thing that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow around naming the labour, the emotional labour that we go through in actually doing this work. And some of you, I could hear it in your voices about the emotions of actually sharing your work with us. And I just thought that my research is around looking at how we give a language to when we're doing autoethnography, when we're sharing with others, what it does to us emotionally. So it's just a general reflection in that how often do we reflect on our emotional labour of doing this work as well as actually doing this work. I hope that made sense.
I think it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to say to you, Viv, your account of boarding school really reminded me of like prison. Like I haven't been to prison, but I'm basing this on like Orange is the New Black, basically, and how they like talking there about how they're sort of more segregated than they are on the outside. Like these groups of like Asians, Black people, gay people, whatever, like they're more divided. But then as I was thinking that, I was wondering, is that really true actually? Because I feel like we kind of are still quite segregated, like in major society, though there are points where we come together. And I just wondered what you felt about that kind of segregation and whether you see it outside of boarding school or whether it did feel like prison as well.
I mean, the thing about prison, even though I'm not here, I think that when talking with, say, my sisters who have the same experiences, something I will admit that we joked about. But of course, only having the same representation of what prison could possibly be like. I guess I'm thinking about yes, I mean, absolutely still experiencing the segregation outside, but I think the difference being that boarding school became the, essentially like a home environment. So it was looking at what being, I guess, bombarded with that segregation, having to try and figure out the tribes and how it's going to work whenever you're all 11 years old and everyone's so fickle. I guess it feels to me like it's I guess maybe pumped up or quite there's something about it that felt extreme. But I guess I can even sometimes in some ways feel the difficulty in even trying to answer your question, because that was my life. I don't have it might be watching, I don't know, but maybe even TV shows and seeing, oh, that's what an adolescence and other adolescents could look like, or people sort of have, or maybe a release outside of school finishing and maybe stepping into different kinds of tribes. But so I think there's definitely something there about an increased sense of segregation maybe in that institutional environment. But it's difficult to say.
In relation to prisons, schools, hospitals are literally the same. The systems are the same, and we still have that same sort of hierarchy and segregation that happens. So Michael Foucault talks about the fact that crime and punishment talks about the fact that schools are literally the stepping stone to prisons, and mental institutions are all the same.
You talked about triangular spaces. Could you tell a little more about it? Because
So the triangle space is where you're bringing in what happens internally in the psychic experience, unconscious that comes out in sort of like Freudian state, but joining those areas of yourself in a space that is safe. So poetry for me is that safe space where you can articulate the anxiety and pain of what you're experiencing on the outside with the tensions that's happening in the unconscious. And you're giving rise to words that are then able to articulate those different areas of yourself. And that works from Armstrong.
Sort of the poetry is the triangular
Is the
space
space.
where you feel safe enough to let the words speak.
Yeah.
I wanted to say thank you. I'm terrible with names, so so this is why I've been quiet, because especially I would say for our culture about names, I felt it was important to say thank you for sharing the feelings that you experienced within that space and how it resonated.
I think for me, in the space of prison, the fact that prisons are a space that Black women specifically is not known to work in that space, it's for me to articulate that Black women work in that particular occupation, because prison occupation tends to be focused on the Black male, the white male experience, and gender tends to be left out, and intersectionality of gender and race is even more left out. So for me, creating
it's very difficult to attend under these circumstances.
Ex-military who are heterosexual work in that space. It's a very diverse space of employees that work there with different voices and different experiences and reasons for working in that space.
This is not so much of a question. I was just noticing, Beverley, when you were presenting, how tangibly the audience was touched by what you were saying. Because, yeah, I'm trying to promote autoethnography in youth teaching, and there's one undergraduate student that is interested in horror and how horror can actually talk about subjects that are in ways that we cannot discuss. Just allow the audience to feel something as opposed to tell them something. Makes sense. There was something about the combination of the imagery,
yes,
and the autoethnography and the way that it was presented that felt like we all had an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, sweat up of my feet.
Thank you. Yeah. Because when I actually read this story too, when I first read the story too, it haunted me for days. And then I thought, why, what's going on here? And I just sat down, rewrote it, but I had to bring in the Black experience, the way that in maternity care, when Black women say that we're about to give birth, nobody wants to listen. That's why we're still dying. I had to make people aware that in slavery, those young girls were being sexually abused and nobody realizes that's how brutal slavery was. And then, like for me, how do we show our resistance? That was like, yeah, that's what I would do. I would eat myself if I could. You have to be extreme in order to get rid of all that pain and that anger. And yeah. So I just understand. Thank you.
Can I? Sorry, you were first. No, it's okay. Okay. I wanted to. I can't remember the name. I wanted to because what we're seeing is quite a different way of how the subject of
blackness is being discussed here. And I felt your presentation resonated. It resonated in a really deep, and your personal transformation. I felt it really touched me, that I was left breathless.
Yeah.
And it's another form that we may have the active. And we need all the forms, which is what's just actually being in the room and not being the only one. First of all, I want to say how exciting that is. I felt the story, and it was just so complex in that we touched so many things that's happening in society about the mixed placing of Black children, that we're not really seeing that it matters where we're placed and the impact that that has.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly emotional in its depth and its strength. You held it, and you managed the space that we are continually forced. You embodied that, how we hold being Black and being in a dominant white environment. So it was wonderful to see that contrast of taking the space and at the same time being in the space and managing the space. So
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you went first, because that was partly what I was going to say. I want to say thank you to all the presenters. I thought it was an amazing session. And it's just taken me a little while to sit with it. Having been in really vibrant autoethnographic rooms for many years, I think I'm more familiar with the effect that your piece had on me. Listening, the tears just came out of my eyes. It wasn't like it was an uncontrollable response. And I was so horrified by your piece. It was really, I was just so moving and wanting to block my ears and trying to get away from the piece. And that's appropriate. And I thought, that's right. You have to sit with this, because this is what we've done to people of color for so long, and it requires being horrified and uncomfortable. And maybe as a sort of escape mechanism, about halfway through, I started thinking of it as metaphoric. And that, okay, it's okay. This is not a real person really eating their, limbs. It's I think of Toni Morrison's work, and, it's both real in the sense that we know enslaved people did do extreme self-harm and suicidal things at times as a way of reclaiming their own selves. It's better to do it to myself, in a sense, than to have it be done. And we also know that white people, slave owners and other white people, have done as many, if not more, gruesome things to Black bodies over time. And so I was really trying to sit in that space, but to be able to, I've never heard a piece that was quite like that in autoethnographic rooms. That was like, yes, the horror genre, but not really. And the affect of disgust and desperateness to escape is something quite different than mostly I've experienced, even when there's been abuse narratives or difficult narratives. But the combination, the juxtaposition of your two pieces, even the way you performed them, your own affect in performing them, was excruciating in both ways. And I just thought, if your image on that Black creative autoethnography is not a book cover, it should be. And I think your companion pieces, in a way, they're just both eviscerating, but in different ways. It's just excruciating.
Thank you. Because actually, I was nearly in tears when you were speaking. as well.
Oh, thank you.
And I thought, no, don't lose it, Beverley, because you both stands up there.
Yeah. It's important to feel, but to feel disgust about disgusting things that have happened to us and to others. It's important. Prepare for it.
This is my first time here. I have been to Northern Denizens gig once.
Oh, God.
I'm actually a maths educator, and I would normally be at international maths educator conferences. But the first time I went to, it was called the qualitative Decolonising. There wasn't an eye. So between the candy store and the mall, there was the first session I went to was this amazing read out writing. And about halfway through, I realized that there was an eye there. I lost my father between the candy store and the mall, and I cried because of the context. And what I want to say is that for me, the eye present in this room was amazing. And that I want to thank you and you, especially because of reminding us that we are multiple selves. That there isn't a single eye, as I thought back then at Oisey, that where is the eye? That we're intersectional. We are the student Kate and the counsellor Kate and the therapist Kate and the Kate now and the Kate then and the Kate to be. And I've been incredibly moved by all your pieces. But especially I am left with my multiple layers of I-ness within me. They're all clamoring and speaking together. So thank you.
Yeah.
I just have an observation. I thought that the more personal your stories were, the more universal they were at the same time. So you can actually relate to lots of things in other people's personal stories. And I'm just amazed. I was so moved by all your stories. It's incredible.
I identify that. I didn't dare say it, but that's how I often feel. There's always something that touches me for some obvious or less obvious reasons. Yeah.
I have a question for Gemma. Your research was on like cisgender experiences of men and women in the therapy room. I'm just really intrigued as to what the other experience of that is like, what it's like to be a trans therapist in the room with system, vice versa. How much of that worry that you held, like it's going to be different, is about gender, how much of it's about sexuality? I always find that a really interesting question. I was listening to some people talk about erotic countertransference, and they were sort of, it was quite strange, they were sort of addressing one of the few men in the room and sort of posing the question like, do you feel strange for the female client? Like, do you worry about that more? Which I think is a bit of an odd question to ask. And I was also sat there thinking, if you're queer, that's always a question in the therapy room. So I'm just really interested in your thoughts.
I mean, I think, there's so much scope to look at these things. I think I was focusing obviously on the kind of mixed gender, because that's where I was at that point as a trained therapist. But I think this question of difference and those differences in the therapy and how we navigate that is, I just think it's endless. I mean, the more clients I see, the more I realise how just completely different every single one is, and how I'm different with every, how I suppose it's that multiple self again, you're slightly different with every single person as well, aren't you? I mean, I think, the kind of conclusion I've come to at the moment, which will obviously keep developing anyway, is
is, I suppose, not to be afraid to kind of name that and voice it and talk about it with the client. So I think part of my process of looking, you know, in this gender was for me to also not be afraid to say, you know, how is it right now, or how are you feeling, you know, if it arose with me as a female therapist. So I think it's kind of getting over the sort of fear that you shouldn't name something or you know, bring it out in the open as well when it's appropriate, when it's feeling appropriate. There's so much scope to look at, you know, more dimensional response. Absolutely, huge amounts. Yes, it's a work in progress.
There's a question that I'm debating with myself as to what to ask. Well, I'm very, yeah. Well, that's kind of good. So having read your work, Gemma, it was a lot of personal process that I found really touching, and it was related to the start of your journey, your relationship with your father. I'm left feeling, because of the 8 minutes presentation, certain things could be conveyed, certain things for the interest of time. But I was wondering if you felt that you would like to own that up or not. Yeah.
About my dad, yeah. I guess because I think when I was talking to him once about it, something you were saying to me when I read it was really evocative, and that perhaps didn't come across as much as it could have done. But I think, yeah, I suppose this process started really with thinking about my relationship with my dad, and you know, he died about 12 years ago. Actually, the anniversary was coming up at the end of this month, and I think, you know, he sort of died a very kind of in a very lonely, sort of depressed man at the end, and I think that's kind of stuck with me. And I think part of this process that I went through was also carrying this massive guilt about not being able to have made things okay, and not being able to, I guess, make them happy, or certainly to ease the unhappiness. I came to the conclusion that I feel responsible for other people's unhappiness in this process. So yeah, that played quite a key part of history. The old chestnut going back to so, yeah.
I guess I was wondering when you were speaking about wanting to see yourself in the counselling or something, or to bring your whole self. How do you navigate that when you get to the room and there isn't someone that's like you, or how does the person who's in the room help you to feel that it's okay to be you in the room?
Yeah. I mean, whenever I was thinking about that and thinking about the efforts I went to try and find that lived experience, I also, you know, realized at the same time that it's, and I think this has already been mentioned, it's not possible to, you know, acknowledging that it's not possible to get, you know, a complete replica of myself, and making peace with that, and it felt to me like it was about, like, I guess, encouraging all the time for, you know, I mean, with what we're talking about, that self-educating, you know, awareness of intersectionality and all the different parts that we carry. And I think on my part, then I guess hearing these conversations, like having that trust, and, you know, trusting, for example, that my white queer therapist is wanting to be curious about my Asian heritage experience, is wanting to be curious about my experience of what it was like in a boarding school, even though she didn't go to one. And so I guess it feels like there's maybe a two-way process there of a kind of trust on both sides. Yeah.
Can I comment on that, or maybe just make an observation on this? I'm a psychologist and a practicing therapist, and I was very struck by your you made a strong statement of the need to find a therapist with a common lived experience in as many aspects as possible. And I was wondering about the difference between the lived experience of the therapist and therefore almost a joint identification or similar identification versus the idea of a therapist being, and I think I speak from a protecting myself or wanting to substantiate myself position in the therapy room, versus the idea of a therapist whom you can trust to create a connection with you beyond similarity. And even if we don't share similar aspects of identity, there can be a trust created in the connection between you and the therapist, where you know the therapist is really curious to hear your story. And I don't know, because I'm heterosexual and I don't have a queer identity and so on, and I'm wondering if it's different, whether being queer requires more of a shared identity in the therapy space than being straight.
I think what you're saying is, I think the risk of people like slightly repeating myself. I think you talk about trust, and I think there is, I could see when I was writing, the need for and the anxiety in trying to find that lived experience in another, the trust that I do need to develop and build. And I think, to be honest, that trust has been, broken over years of being dismissed, criticized and however it's happened. I'm recognizing that I'm bringing that trust into the room and seeing that in myself and having to challenge that, because I do think, yes, what you're saying in the relationship that is developed between the therapist and the client, that that is the core, and that has the power to transcend the mistrust that has happened, what's being carried outside of the therapy room into the therapy room. I guess when I was thinking about this more, I wonder if, again, maybe having to be aware of it, is that, with seeing another, sitting in front of a queer therapist as a client, do I let my guard down a bit and think, well, they'll, so maybe a challenge there that I need to think about, but I just assume that there's less work to be done there for the sake, they've lived it, and actually maybe there's a better understanding I could gain from someone who hasn't been walking in those shoes and has done that, the work that you're talking about, to really try and see things from my side. And so then again, I can see that that's a trust that, a different experience that I could open myself up to.
I'm also just realizing very often in the therapy room, when I deal with a patient who comes from a very similar background as mine and similar identification, I assume certain things about their lived experience that might be totally incorrect.
Right.
So if someone comes from a different position of mine, I do find myself being more curious very often, and I think that might be from my position. I think.
Yeah. And I would say the same for myself, to be honest, as a trainee therapist. I think it's really good to be able to talk about this. I think we can spend so much time maybe on another side,
and to pay attention also to to that.
One of the things I was thinking about, because I'm also a counsellor, and one of the things I was thinking about was from client's experience. I think if you've had those experiences of feeling you've been dismissed, it's actually, there are barriers to get over, to feel safe, to take those risks. So I think it's part of the process in a way, and one of the things that we've been talking about at work is about the idea between safe and brave spaces. And I think there is something about that process that you need to feel safe enough and with someone that you feel safe enough with to be able to be brave.
Yes, I did, and I'm sorry.
Last comment.
Oh no, about responsibility.
Perfect. Click on.
It's been absolutely wonderful being here. Thank you, everyone. I feel the sexuality, gender, and race in the therapy field. I'm a practicing therapist, and I did say what we're discussing about is a debate that's been going on forever, and the debate about same culture or same sex or even down to class. And I remember my experience when I felt very brave was when I said I was a Black therapist. Don't care if it's male, don't care about their sexuality. I need someone who I could look at, and specifically around being Black, you can't hide that. You can hide your sexuality, you can hide your class, you can change how you speak. You can't hide being Black. So there is that resonance. I know that the Black therapists would have. And I have private clients, and most of my clients are actually word of mouth. And it comes, when we talk about building a relationship with the client, a lot of the clients, when they come, they haven't got time to go through this process that we talk about. They want immediate I want to be understood right now in this moment, not wait for you to get to know me, and I'm a curiosity. That's what I particularly hear from a lot of Black clients, is voyeurism. Or even their sexuality, the voyeurism, that they want someone that doesn't see them as something, oh, I'm learning from you. So that was just to kind of quickly contain it, that most clients, it's unfair to expect them to come in to go through your process. So we as therapists need to be doing the work that we're here to hold when you come in, not, oh yeah, okay, and we'll work our way through it. So that's just.
Hopefully, future Kates have enjoyed this as much as me. It's a break until 12. We can all discuss and do whatever we want in the breaks. See you then. Some of you.